I can do everything. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, everyone. I'm going to get started. Good evening. My name is Dr. Jacinta Calzada-Marrone. I'm currently an assistant principal for Stafford County Public Schools in Virginia. In my role as an assistant principal, I supervise in the following areas: student services, so that includes 504s and students with IEPs. I also supervise career and technical education, also known as CTE. I supervise business. I also supervise Stafford County's Academy for Technology, which is our STEM program. I'm also responsible for supervising attendance and JED, which is a new program here that we started in Stafford County, which is a school-based program that supports emotional health. In addition to my work as an assistant principal, I have been a special education coordinator for 5 years in Washington, D.C. I've taught in New Jersey as well as D.C. I've been an instructional coach as well as an adjunct professor for Johns Hopkins University. I currently sit on the curriculum advisory board for Drexel University's Master of Educational Administration program, as well as adjuncting for Drexel University within that same program. So it is a pleasure to be here with Rutgers. I am an alum of Rutgers' alternate route program, and I'm very proud of being an alternate route candidate. I've been in education for, I think I'm going into my 14th year, and I started at Rutgers, and I'm very proud to always give back to the program. Today's objectives, we will discuss the following: so learning environment, collaboration, instructional planning and strategies, learner development and individual learning differences, as well as psychological safety for students. With the exception of the fifth one, psychological safety for students, 1 through 4, the objectives 1 through 4 are objectives directly taken from the Council for Exceptional Children. So all of this is research-based and has been put into practice, things that I've utilized within the schools that I've supported myself, as well as my experiences that I've had supporting others. So if you could, this will be very interactive. And so there are polls within or throughout my slideshow and presentation. So if you could join or scan the QR code and just share what your teaching role is, so that I have an understanding of who all is here today. Okay, so it seems like the majority of teachers here are general education teachers tonight, with some special education teachers. I'm curious about the other. So if teachers of the other, if you can put in the chat, what is the other? If you're not special education or general education or an ESOL teacher, what is it that you teach, or what is your function in education? And I'm keeping an eye out on the chat for that. Okay. Seems to be still general education or special education teachers. Oh, could not scan.
And one of them might have been me, so I apologize.
Oh,
I'm joining in.
That's fine. That's fine.
I'm other.
That's okay. I appreciate that. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you everyone for participating in my poll, just so that I have a general understanding of who I'm supporting today and how I can continue to support. So I am I think my perception of education has changed over the years. Again, I've been in your shoes as a general education teacher, special education teacher, um, and I've been on different levels of education at this point. And so how I view things um, has changed. And with that, um, looking at the learning environment and looking at how I'll support uh, or present on the different objectives today, I do want to look at the total population of which we are supporting. And so you'll see different things in the presentation where I am pulling up data and talking through data and how that correlates to what's in a class, what occurs in a classroom and how to support a classroom. So for the first objective of today, learning environment, this is standard 2 in from the Council of Exceptional Learners. And standard 2 is professionals create a safe, inclusive, culturally responsive learning environment so that individuals with exceptionalities become active and effective learners and develop emotional well-being, positive social interactions, and self-determination. Okay. So looking at the demographic of students with disabilities in the United States, and I thought that this was very important as myself as an educator, I've been all over at this point, primarily on the East Coast, but with ties in other states. And so while I've been in New Jersey and I've been in DC as an educator and supported in Maryland, and now I'm in Virginia, you can see the differences in the demographic and percentage of students within the United States. And so I'm assuming that everyone is from New Jersey, but I could be wrong. So if there's anyone who is not an educator in New Jersey, just please, I'm keeping an eye on the chat. Feel free to add where you're from. But looking at New Jersey primarily, percentage is higher than the US average. And the US average is 15%, whereas New Jersey is 17%. And just me being someone who looks at data, and this may not be applicable to New Jersey, but just looking at it in total and looking at the different areas, something that caught my eye was looking at Puerto Rico, which is such a small territory, but the percentage of students with disabilities in Puerto Rico is 34%. So when we talk about, and again, I am addressing questions that were sent to me that I believe you all had, and this is directly and geared towards those questions that were presented and how to support exceptional learners and different strategies. So, and how students are identified. I think it's really important to note just the demographic of just the United States in general and wondering, right? Just our notice and wonder of, how are students identified? Another point here is I also have the demographic for English language learners, right? And so looking at English language learners, the national average for the United States is, it makes up 14% of the United States population. And so looking at New Jersey, it's 7.2%, which is below the national average. Okay. And for me, this is important, and I don't know why my slideshow is not working, but give me a second. Let's see, back up so you guys can see this. Oops, not that. I'm looking at my slideshow. Okay. Okay. So just in looking at data in general, right? So me as an assistant principal, I may look at data a little bit differently than teachers in the classroom, but this is actually a fast fact sheets that I put together for myself, for my school here in Virginia. And we support a very large population. And so our student population is 1,932 students, and that does not include our travel students, because we do have a travel program for the STEM program that I mentioned earlier that I supervise. So it brings our student population up to about 2,300 kids in our building. And so primarily I'm looking at, right, our students with disabilities, and that makes up 15.3% of our population. And that includes our students with IEPs and 504s. And I'm looking at our English language learners, which makes up 11.2% of our population. Another area that I take into consideration and I pay attention to are students who are economically disadvantaged, which is about 44.5% of our school. And so when I break that down as a classroom teacher, and I do want to note at the top right-hand corner of my screen, I have a little toolbox. And so things that I felt like could be good things to add to your own toolbox. This is throughout the presentation where maybe you want to take for your own self and use as strategies within your school or classroom. And so going back to my data sheet, when I break this down, right, as a classroom teacher, this is how a classroom within our school looks right now. So I am in a Virginia high school, and one of the courses that we teach here or provide is economic and personal finance. Economic and personal finance is a course that is required by the state of Virginia and is also a course where students are tested. And so students are also required to take the WISE assessment. And they also have to pass in order to graduate from high school. And so in breaking down the demographics and looking at students specifically for this class, there are 34 students in the classroom, 67% which are male. And then when I break down the learner profile for those students, in this particular classroom, 6 students have IEPs, 3 students have 504s, and 4 students are identified as English language learners. And then also looking at the grade level in which this particular class, there are 20 juniors in the class, 7 seniors, and 7 sophomores. Again, it's really important to note that this is a class that a senior would need to graduate, and if they do not pass the class or the assessment, they would be at risk for not graduating. And so just in looking at a classroom, it's really important to know your own data of your own classroom so that when you are developing lesson plans for a student and you're looking at data for a particular student, you're understanding the makeup of your classroom so that you can break those pieces down to support individual learners. So that's the takeaway from that, right? So knowing the population of your school, knowing the kids that you support, and understanding what's happening in your own space, in your own classroom, so that you are able to collaborate with those that you need to collaborate with in order to break down learning for students, okay? And so that goes back from my data piece to knowing how to support students, right? Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's something that I always go back to. I like to believe and wholeheartedly take advantage of being trauma informed. I think that that's really important to understand that, yes, you know, I'm gonna go back a couple of slides. This is my demographic of students, right? And with 44.5% of them being economically disadvantaged, right? 29.11% of those students being chronically absent. It's really important for me to be trauma informed and trauma sensitive to those students and understand that they are going through things before they walk into this building. They are going through things before they walk into the classroom. So identifying with just the basic needs of a student, those psychological needs, is very important. So as you're developing your lesson plans and as you're supporting students, just keeping that in mind, those bottom two there, the physiological and the safety of students, okay? And so when we talk about classroom procedures and being prepared for a learning environment to support those students, let's chat about what are some things to consider when establishing classroom procedures, okay? I don't know if you are aware, one of the main books to support that is The First Days of School and How to Be an Effective Teacher. Literally outlines just how to develop classroom procedures. So it is something I've carried with me since maybe my second or third year of teaching. And again, I've been in education for about 14 years. And it's still something that I go back to. It's still something that I gift to new teachers. And so I highly advise that we take advantage of the resources that are available. So in my next slide, which will develop a word cloud. So I'm going to go back to my other piece here because it works better for that. If we could just add into the chat, what are some things to, not the chat, but the slideshow, what are some things to consider when establishing classroom procedures? So as people continue to contribute, I do want to note that there is no right or wrong answer to this, and all of this is very important. We all know how a word cloud works, so consistency seems to be a word that pops out to most folks. I see different abilities, demographics, neurodiversity, relationships, knowing students and their needs, being positive, grade level, responsibility, routines. Routines is mentioned more than once. Procedures, reinforcement, the exceptionalities, safety, clear rules, and community. And so these are all absolutely true when considering establishing classroom procedures. So I'm just going to work my way back here and just add some additional things to consider. So when developing a procedure for your classroom or classroom procedures in general, consistency is so important. So that main word, you all seem to have that embedded in your thought process and how you want to prepare for your classroom. And so while this can look different for any level, and I've been at all levels, I've been through pre-K through 8 for the majority of my career, and then the last 2 years in high school. So when you think about how you want students to enter into a classroom and exit your classroom, what it looks like to transition from station to station, and with providing strategies within the classroom. Classroom vision and classroom rules, and I think it's really important to engage students within that process when you're developing how you want your classroom to be managed. And then just positive incentives and then what those consequences are. So I think it's truly important as a student myself or a classroom teacher, right? As a student, I want to know, right, what are the rules? And then if I break the rule, what are the consequences of that rule, right? So here are some other things to consider. So on the left, you'll see at my school, and I'm sure some other high schools are utilizing this. It's called e-hall pass. E-Hall Pass is a electronic bathroom pass system. And so how do you want students to use E-Hall Pass in your classroom? And so this is a poster that a teacher created in her classroom, and just, the procedure on how to use E-Hall Pass and how to request to go to that designated space. This second picture is cell phone consequences. So within my county, it is a firm rule that there is no cell phones to be used during instructional time. And so this particular photo was taken from a middle school library, and what their consequences and procedures are for if a student is caught with a cell phone. This here is a school-wide procedure or expectations of how students should abide by the vision of the school. For this particular school, this isn't my high school. I'm North Stafford High School. This is Stafford High School. I am one who I keep materials and things like that. When they pop up and make sense, I kind of include it. So I actually saw this summer while I was at Stafford High School for for professional development, and I just thought it was amazing how they put together. They go by tribe and their vision and their mission, and they embedded that in how they want students to live and breathe in the building, pretty much, right? And if there are any questions, please feel free to add them in the chat at any point, or raise your hand. I'll be more than willing to answer questions as I go. Okay, so this is another way to identify procedures and routines in your classroom. This is actually taken from my school. These are actually agendas teachers have posted in their classroom, and I do understand that technology looks different in different schools, and how we present things looks different in different schools. I do want to say that I do have a favorite out of all three of these. My favorite one is the live picture here. This is actually taken from an algebra, I think it's an Algebra 1 classroom, from our county teacher of the year. She does a phenomenal job with just articulating to her students what exactly she wants from them, or what she expects from them, or what is coming up. So you can see here she has her quote of the week. She has what unit that she's in. She's posted what the date is here. We are on an XY schedule, so it's Y day. During our lunchtime, we have a remediation hour, and so students transition block to block throughout the week. So this particular day, it was 1Y, so students were to go back to their first block Y class, so she's articulated that here. She also has already shared, there are no computers today, so you should not have any electronic devices out to distract you. She has the agenda. She has what's assigned today, if there's anything due, what's upcoming in terms of unit test. She has the objective of the day, and then also the last day of the quarter, which I think is really important for students to know what's coming up and what's needed. There's a question in the chat: how do you establish rules, and how can you become, the authority in a special education setting? And so establishing rules in a special education setting, so that might look different, right? So within a special education setting, depending on the level, right? In our county, our students are leveled by level 1 or level 2, depending on how many service hours that they have. I know in where I was in DC, it's tiered. It's not necessarily level 1 or level 2, but it's tiered 1 through 4. And so that's based on if a student has a dedicated aide, or what the needs of that classroom is. And so within a special education setting, if you could describe what your special education setting is like. Is this a self-contained setting? Is this a collaborative setting? Is this inclusion? Because behavior, I think, so in my experience, students who exhibit behavior, they're trying to communicate something, right, for the most part. So I think developing developing classroom rules with your students, remaining consistent, will let them know that you are the authoritative figure in the classroom, and then collaborating with both parents and the additional supports and resources in your building with them. And so as I continue, I do have strategies and whatnot in place for different groups of students. I will also come back to this question as well, okay? So the next piece of, or the next objective is collaboration. So standard 7, professionals collaborate with families, other educators, related service providers, individuals with exceptionalities, and personnel from community agencies in culturally responsive ways to address the needs of individuals with exceptionalities across a range of learning experiences. And so define collaboration. Collaboration is how professionals work together. And so true collaboration requires intention, effort, and skill, trust. Within some qualitative research that I've done, trust is a facilitator of collaboration. So it enables participants to communicate clearly and discuss topics that might even be considered sensitive. So being able to trust the professionals around you. If you are in a co-teaching space and you are a general education teacher and a special education teacher, being able to trust one another to support the student, because at the end of the day, or throughout the day, I should say, our positions as educators is for the success of a child and to increase student achievement. So being able to trust each other as those professionals, and if there are things that we see that may be inconsistent, working together towards a common goal. And so within special education, a high leverage practice is to collaborate with professionals to increase student success. The first high leverage practice is to support student achievement, specifically for students with disabilities, and that includes collaboration. This includes developing a communication and interaction process with co-teaching and working with paraprofessionals, dedicated aides, or other related service providers. So this is a collaboration matrix that I have developed. Within this matrix, you see a multitude of different positions, whether you are supporting general education, special education, English language learners, your related service provider, or even as instructional leadership, the ebb and flow of possible groups of collaboration. While some of these may be typical collaborative relationships, there are some schools who have maximized on the unique skills of team members outside of the classroom. So, for example, within a collaborative, I can use my school as a prime example. So we have in our building what you call collab transition classrooms. And so in that space, you will find a general education teacher, a special education teacher, an ESOL teacher, and a paraprofessional. So you've got 4 adults in one classroom supporting up to about 35 students. And again, going back to that one visual of all the different types of students in one classroom, I do think that breakdown is needed. And then it's also really important to look at data together as a team and plan together as a team. Right, so that brings me to instructional planning and strategies. And so professionals select, adapt, and use a repertoire of evidence-based instructional strategies to advance learning of individuals with exceptionalities, right? So in that, breaking down collaboration and just the intellectual preparation for lesson planning, this is a system that we use here within our school and has been implemented within our actual lesson plan template. And so our classes are 78 minutes long. And so a 78-minute class could be broken down into 4 quadrants, where a teacher is providing whole group instruction or specialized instruction for the first 15 to 18 minutes. Within that second quadrant of 30 minutes, providing differentiated learning. And that could be supporting students within groups, that could be providing particular accommodations to students, that could be working through your RTI or MTSS process and the different needs of students and breaking down those interventions and strategies. Working through a formative assessment within quadrant 3, and then using that formative assessment data within quadrant 4 to provide additional support to students in small groups, whether that be enhanced learning or having to reteach or extend learning. So this brings us back into those 4 quadrants. What do you want students to know within the first quadrant? So the objective, the learning target, activating prior knowledge, and providing that direct instruction. Quadrant 2, what are the best teaching strategies to use for individual learners, right? So you're providing that differentiated guided practice in there. Small groups based on strategies, tiered learning through your MTSS or RTI process. Quadrant 3, how will you know if students are progressing towards the learning target, right? So you're providing formative assessments so that students are progressing towards the learning target and you're giving timely feedback. And then quadrant 4, how will you respond to that student assessment data, right? So extending or enhancing learning for different students, right? And thinking about how you are preparing for a lesson, utilizing those different co-teaching approaches. Again, in a classroom, it could be anywhere from 1 to 4 individuals in the classroom supporting. Primary example was the example I provided earlier for a collab transition classroom within one of or a few of our classrooms in my school building, where you have a general education teacher, a special education teacher, an ESOL teacher, and the possibility of a paraprofessional or dedicated aide. And so when you're planning out your lessons, what approach will you use to support students and when will that occur? I think some primary spaces of when that can occur are within each space, honestly. So quadrant 1, what are you doing as a general education teacher in the classroom? And what are those resources in terms of your ESOL teacher and a special education teacher doing in that space at that same time? Again, with your differentiated learning and strategies, how are you breaking up small groups? That could be anywhere from stations to, and I'll go back to, go back to my slide here. It could be anywhere from stations or parallel teaching, or I know there are plenty of students who are also identified as ESOL and special education. So how are students who have IEPs and also are English language learners, how are those 2 teachers working together to support students? And so again, breaking that down, looking at data and being data informed, the same approach to your intellectual preparation or your lesson planning can be utilized in just your professional learning cycle and being data driven. And so I'm also a firm advocate of professional learning communities. And in the same process in which you are a professional learning community, you can also look at data to support students in order to plan as a community, right? So something that I have developed here within my school are professional learning communities amongst our special education teachers, which is an area that I supervise. And again, it looks different in different places and in different schools. Here at the high school level, we have courses that are learning strategies courses. We have social skills courses for students with disabilities. We have collab classes where we have co-teaching happening, and that can be, that is in most spaces. So that is definitely in our 4 cores, which are math, science, English, and social studies. We do have some electives that support our level 2 students, and so there is collaboration happening in that space too. And our learning strategies classes are classes that are built into student schedules to additionally support instruction that they are receiving in, let's say, an algebra class. So it could be a learning strategies class specifically for algebra that's written into an IEP. So you have different teachers supporting the same students, getting those teachers together within a professional learning community and looking at curriculum and looking at direct instruction and different assessments and how we can provide opportunities to reteach or enhance learning. And so this is something that is done within our school. And I think it's really important if you're thinking, I can go to a middle school space where students may be traveling from teacher to teacher. And if you get together the whole 6th grade team, for example, and you have that same student being supported by multiple teachers, this is something else that could be utilized amongst the different subject contents and looking at the student and how that student is learning or achieving in a different space and supporting with strategies where a student is excelling or discussing strategies that could be implemented to help a student succeed. So in looking at learner development and individual learning differences, this is standard 1. Professionals understand how exceptionalities may interact with development and learning, and use this knowledge to provide meaningful and challenging learning experiences for individuals with exceptionality. So again, going back to my data, right? Because looking at data is one of the most important things that we can do to support students. Breaking down that data, right? So this is the United States average of the demographic of students with disabilities. And then I also broke down just what it could look like in a particular school. So this is my particular school and the breakdown of students with disabilities. And so you will see that the United States average specific learning disability is really high and makes up the majority of students who are classified under IDEA between ages 3 and 21. Specific speech language impairment follows that, and then other health impaired, autism, developmental delay. Developmental delay is for students who are under the age of 7. And so when students turn 8, if they are still deemed eligible for special education, they will no longer be eligible under developmental delay. So students are typically reevaluated to determine what the disability category is. In addition to intellectual disability, emotional disturbance, and multiple disabilities, these are amongst the highest within the United States average. And there are 13 learning disabilities under IDEA. So in my particular school, this looks different, right? While this is the average in the United States, within my school, within the average, right, or matching the average, specific learning disability is very high in our building, whereas speech language impairment is not. And so just looking at that transition, most high school students do age out of speech language support, but again, it is something that is addressed if needed. Other health impairment is also really high in our building. Autism is also a factor, intellectual disability, emotional disturbance, and then multiple disabilities. And so again, knowing what your classroom layout is very important when supporting different students in your classroom. Okay. So this is, I want you to think of this quote, really, your socks make that much of a difference. As I play this video, please let me know if the sound is working on this. And if not, I'll play around with things to get it to work. Can you hear this? Let me make sure. Okay, I'm gonna try again. Can you hear me now? So I think this is really important, and I am going to put the link in the slide. Put the link in the chat so that you all can watch it. Because I do think it is such a great video to, let me make sure I get this. Let's see. I'm gonna put it in the chat, and if you could just watch it on your own so that you can hear it. It's only about a couple minutes long. And so we could all come back and just say you're back in the chat. I'll keep going. All right, I see that folks are back and love the video. So I am a TikTok queen, y'all. I love TikTok. And so I will sit on TikTok, and then again, I am a collector of resources and things like that. So that was a quick download for me. I do have another video on socks. So if you would like my sock video, I will be more than happy to send it to you. But with that, again, I have another slide. And so I want to ask you, how do your socks make you feel? I know some folks can't use the poll. I've got in the chat, I've got warm, comfy. My socks make me feel clean, protected. It varies on colors. I got another warm. comfortable, ready for the day. My heart eyes emoji are at 50%. Oh, no, it's more than 50% now. The other group of folks here, it makes you smile. I like to mismatch my socks, someone shared in the chat. And so who knew that something as simple as socks, right, could change how a kid walks into your school, walks into your classroom. And so when you think about socks, or you think about just some of the other things that students may be experiencing, I think how we approach the situation, or what we find, or what we provide to a classroom really matters. So again, going back to my Maslow's hierarchy, and going back to looking at my demographic of kids in my classroom or in my school, and how I present daily and think about how to support students in my classroom, thinking about how I develop lessons and collaborate with students. When kids are at a disadvantage, they need that additional support to be successful, right? Thinking about students who are English language learners and are newcomers to the country, right? Not knowing anybody, not being able to speak the language. And when students are at a disadvantage, that's when behaviors may arise, right? Go back to another slide and just handy dandy with switching back and forth, right? Again, my needs. And looking at different disabilities. So I am only going to review emotional disturbance, and I chose emotional disturbance because my data just go. When I did my research for different disabilities, and the highest suspension rate of disabilities, emotional disturbance was the highest rate of discipline or suspension, or even up for expulsion. And within my role as a special education coordinator, I sat in a space where I chaired meetings where families found out that their students were they met the criteria for emotional disturbance. And again, I was in that setting, I was in a pre-K through 8th grade setting. And so with given the definition, and I'll read that, emotional disturbance is defined as an inability to learn that cannot be explained by intellectual, sensory, or health factors, and exists over a long period of time and to a marked degree, and that adversely affects a child's educational performance. Emotional disturbance can include schizophrenia. The term does not apply to children who are socially maladjusted. It is considered a cognitive disability where behaviors are severe, chronic, and frequent. It adversely impacts the educational performance to the extent that a student requires specifically designed instruction, and the behavior occurs at school, or at least in one other setting, which is typically at home. And so students could be adversely affected in the area of academic progress, social relationships, personal adjustment, classroom adjustment, self-care, and vocational skills. So if you can think about a particular student in your classroom who may be identified as being emotionally disturbed, you can think about just the different adverse areas in which they may be affected. And so considering that, when you are planning and trying to support that student, there are different things that they're dealing with. So some of the common disorders that are umbrellaed within the term of emotional disturbance include being oppositionally defiant, or having anxiety, being bipolar, antisocial, even ADHD, and conduct can be incorporated in that into the extent of what the student may be experiencing. And typically this is gathered from psychological evaluations that are done by school psychologists or um, uh, outside evaluations. And teacher input is gathered in that. So teacher input as well as parent input, and given the age of the student, student input is incorporated in that, and scales are reviewed to determine if students meet the criteria for emotional disturbance. And so some of those characteristics include being hyperactive, right? So short attention span, being impulsive, uh, open defiance to authority, rules, inappropriate classroom behavior, being highly distracted or poor social relationships, being confrontational within behavior, being easily frustrated, and being resistant to change. I do have another video, and I will ask that you all watch this one as well. I am sorry that my audio is not capturing where I can just share it for everybody, but I do ask that you take the time to watch this video as well. This one is a couple more minutes longer than the other video, but it is a simulation of a student who is emotionally disturbed and how they present in the classroom. So again, just like we did before, if you could just watch the video and then come back when you're done and let me know in the chat. I see folks are coming back. And in the chat, I love that the message is all about never giving up on a student. It's powerful, great, motivating, and gives hope. So important to never give up and gives the student time and patience, motivating. I do want to go back to, I love that in this particular simulation and scenario, again, the teacher did not give up. But I also think that there was more that could have been said or done in this space for a particular student, right? So students who all students need relationships, right? So that goes back to, again, our Maslow's hierarchy, right? And just identifying that or remembering that students come into school with their own baggage, just like we do every day as adults, right? We don't know what's going on at home with some of our students. And so being kind to a student, I think, is one of the most important things that we can do, and trying to build a relationship. Someone in the chat said this is why it is important to build strong relationships with your students so that they know that we are here. One of the things that our superintendent actually says is that you would think that we're here every day to provide an education for our students. While we are, one of the biggest things and the most important things that we do is provide safety to our students. And so building trust building trust within our classroom, building trust with our colleagues to be able to support students, building trust and strong relationships with our students, and so that they feel comfortable. Okay. And so the next few slides do review some strategies within the classroom that can be used. One of my favorite strategies, and again, this is another one that I've been carrying with me for a very long time, probably since about my second or third year of teaching, is to remain emotionally constant as a teacher, right? And what does that mean? That means self-regulating and controlling our own emotions, modeling appropriate self-control and restraint. There are situations that happen in every school building, every classroom, that warrant um, warrant a heightened response sometimes. And as humans, we would act within that warrant, but it's really important to remain calm, and be very clear about your expectations and your procedures, going back to your procedures within the classroom, right? I think if a student has a behavior intervention plan, and not all students with emotional disturbance do have behavior intervention plans, but that is a strategy to use when a student does have a BIP. So if the student exhibits a new behavior, for example, if a student is now cursing and that was not a behavior listed on the intervention previously, letting the appropriate folks know on the IEP team so that that can be something that is addressed and strategies are provided to support that student. And then again, that collaboration piece, so establishing a consistent connection of communication with parents, whether it's positive or negative, in order to support your student is extremely important. So the next few strategies are very behavior targeted. And so, for example, if a student is using inappropriate language, the desired behavior is for the student to be able to express their thoughts and emotions using non-offensive language. And so a strategy that could be used is to clearly define the offensive language with the student, identify the offensive words, and teach alternative ways for the student to be able to express their anger or redirect their attention. Another strategy in addressing specific target behaviors, a student is refusing to follow directions. So again, the desired behavior is for the student to be able to follow directions and classroom rules, breaking that down into a strategy, clearly defining the problem, using simple directions. For example, if a student is roaming the classroom and the student needs to be sitting down at the time, just continually and being consistent, letting them know what you need from them, and know when to ignore non-compliance, right? Because sometimes students are engaging in a specific behavior in order to gain attention. Another strategy for target behavior, if a student touches others inappropriately. So again, the desired behavior is for students to keep appropriate distance and not touch other students or teachers, right? And so that strategy could be to teach and define boundaries. Do not define boundaries by doing what you ask them not to do. So use clear and concise language, asking the student to not touch your body or not touch another student's body. Another target behavior could be student enters the school or classroom exhibiting behaviors that suggest anger, frustration, and an inability to cope with the demands of the current environment. The desired behavior is for the student to recover from the upsetting event. So a strategy could be to take care, proceed with caution, and address the challenges, and determine if support is needed, right? So determine, in my school building, there's layered supports. I myself as an administrator can support, your your school social worker or your school counselor can support, given the severity or how egregious the behavior can be. School security can be another layer of support. So knowing who your resources are in the building to support. And that brings me back to just the psychological safety of students, right? These are the ACEs, so the adverse childhood experience that a student could go through, and then in different areas in which it can affect. So a student adverse areas for a student could be physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, physical, emotional neglect, some household dysfunctions, which include mental illnesses. So if a student has a parent with a mental illness, if a student has a parent or a relative that's incarcerated, interpersonal violence or domestic abuse, substance abuse, divorce is also an adverse childhood experience, and that can bleed its way into different areas. And so again, utilizing those resources and just being cognizant of, again, the physiological needs and the safety of a student is extremely important. And so that is the end of my actual presentation, and I'm open for questions and coming off. If folks want to come off mute and we have a discussion, let me just stop sharing.
Dr. Calzada-Marrone, just before I lose anybody, I'm going to post an exit ticket in the chat for everybody, and that's how they get their professional development certificate for tonight.
Mhm.
And truly, thank you so much for this information. It was very helpful. I know it was extremely helpful to a lot of people on the line tonight. A lot of their teaching right now. A lot of helpful strategies, and it was really nice timing. It ties directly into what we went over last night in terms of as they're getting into thinking about their planning and their instruction and their assessment and building those relationships. And thank you for mentioning the research. We talked about the research last night. Maslow should sure enough be on everybody's list as something to put into those assignments. But thank you so much. I'm going to let you open it up to questions. I'm going to post in the chat. I also wanted to thank all the teachers online tonight because we had a long night last night and then again tonight. I appreciate you being on and for your thoughtful answers. So there's the exit ticket, and that ticket is going to be available until November 17th, so you can get your professional certificate for tonight's attendance. Okay, so I will mute myself so you can answer questions, and thank you again for everything.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. So does anybody have any questions? Looking in the chat, a lot of thank yous and you're welcome. I have a raised hand from Amira.
Yes, thank you so much. It was really nice and beneficial. I'm a general education teacher, but this year I'm experiencing more IEP students in my classroom. So I have like 17 students and a total of 4 IEP. My problem is I work in a private school, so I don't have any other, like I'm the only teacher, and they always want one-on-one instruction. And if they don't have that, then they start kind of like disrupting the class. And I know it's not really their fault, but do you have any like tips or anything that I could do to better the situation?
I absolutely do. I've also been in that situation where I was a general education teacher one year and I did not have the supports and had students with IEPs in my classroom. And I think that keeping students engaged is really important. I think going back to how you divide students into smaller groups in order to support them is another way that you can uh, you know, make sure that students are successful in your classroom. I also am, one of my favorite strategies is actually station teaching, right? So providing different stations. Some you can have a student who is maybe at a higher level supporting a station because again, you're working just with yourself as a classroom, so you can have a leader in a small group supporting, and then you can also do have a station of yourself where you're rotating your classroom. What subject do you teach, Amira?
Math.
Math. Yeah, definitely having a small group, going over, you could do a whole group of instruction, right? Share whatever your lesson target is for that day. And then for your students who need that additional support when you're moving, and if I go back to, and I'll bring up my slideshow, if you're going back to that, oh man, I'm just losing things. Okay. When you go back to, a second, to my slide deck, and you look at the different quadrants. In this space here, where you're breaking down the differentiated learning, that second quadrant, what are the best teaching strategies to support individual learners in your space, right? So looking at the IEP, what accommodations are needed? Do students need graphic organizers in order to break down problems more? And just developing guided practice within that setting too, with students, and then using that formative feedback in your assessments to guide how you need to additionally support those students, whether you need to reteach or find different strategies. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. I love the station teaching idea. Yes, I will share the PowerPoint so that you all have it.